So, hi. So, what is your full name?
John Matthew Albright.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois.
When?
1959.
All right. Tell me what your parents was like when they were kids.
They were out of my life when I was 4.
Describe the first car you ever had.
My first car was a Toyota Corolla, and the block cracked, and it was a mess.
Tell me about a time you got in trouble when you were young.
Like I wrote on the paper, I went to a military school, so I primarily got in trouble a lot.
How was school in your day different than the school I go to?
Well, I went to a military school, so it was very strict. They could use corporal punishment on you. So it was not you just learned what to do. You just didn't make any mistakes.
Oh, wow. How have you raised your kids differently than your parents raised you?
I didn't have parents that much, and so I probably could have did a better job.
Okay.
I'm remorseful.
Tell me about when you met your wife.
I met her in the California driving school, Montebello, California. She was a order taker, and I was a driving instructor, and so she was competing against 14 other girls, and so she was the smartest one, and so she ended up
With you.
with me, better or worse.
What did people your age do for fun when they were young? Say it.
My life, I always did anything that was against the rules.
We won't get you in trouble.
I just I'm not proud of it, but that's what I did.
All right. Describe your hometown when you were a teenager.
So I grew up in the Indiana Soldiers and Sailors Children's Home in Knightstown, Indiana, and so that was Knightstown, Indiana. So it was a town of what I call crackers, like, this Caucasians that, they didn't really like the Indiana Soldiers and Sailors Children's Home. So when you went to the town, you had like a buzz cut. They knew who you were and they didn't like you.
What was better or worse about life in America when you were growing up as compared to now?
Like I talked in the questions that I answered, I think that in 1977, when I graduated, you could basically retire from a factory job and have a house, and those days are no longer around. So I think it was better in the past because you could, there was more money to be had. That's just my own personal opinion.
Describe one of your strongest memories from when you were growing up.
I wrote about when my father owned a bar, and he put me on a bar stool and gave me a beer.
Tell me about your wedding day.
My wedding day, I hate to sound like I'm not a romantic, but we hadn't gotten married for, X amount of years. So basically, it was her suggestion that we go to the Justice of the Peace and officially tie the knot. And, I know I'm kind of a
Just say it.
I wasn't that great of a father or a husband. And so I went there and we got married, and I'm just lucky that we got married because, because of the marriage, I had insurance that I needed when I needed it.
Oh.
You understand?
Yeah. All right. Tell me what you remember about your grandparents.
About what?
Your grandparents.
Oh, they were great people. They were very kind, very loving, and, they were saints.
All right. What were some rules around your household growing up?
If I had, like me as a teacher, basically I found that, I'm still flexible. I think rules and regulations are very important, and I didn't think that they were when I was a parent, and so I'm very remorseful about, my decisions. But, never get caught. Never tell the truth, and never, tell my wife the truth.
Advice. Describe a typical date you had when you were young.
What's that again?
Describe a typical date you had when you were young.
Like a day?
Like a date, like with someone you like.
A day or a date?
Date.
Like a day.
Like
a date.
Yeah, like
a time.
No, like let's say I like her, and then I take her out to go eat.
Oh, I get it. You mean like a date?
Yeah.
Well, I hate to admit this, but I didn't get married till I was 28. So
Dating wasn't for you.
I dated a lot of people. I mean, women, but I just try to get out of the date as cheaply as possible.
Oh, did you take them like to movies or anything?
Yeah, for example, like one of the things, like when I was in college, I remember I took 3 girls at the same night, but it was like they played the same movie, but I took 3 of them for $1 a piece. I thought that was kind of funny.
Well, at least you took 3.
I mean, but I just want to be clear. I wasn't like a player.
Oh no, it's fine.
No, player's like somebody who like doesn't like respect like females. I was just, I mean, as a dude with other dudes, they were like envious because I could take that many out. And as a dude, all you do is just like lie about all that stuff. You're just exaggerating.
Wow.
But you're looking for the right person. You understand?
Oh, yeah.
So you're looking and you never find them. So you're just looking. And you're not, you're just looking.
I'll experience that one day.
Well, I had the love of my life actually went to the school where I went. So basically she was like a wealthy person. And so I think she was just slumming when she was dating me over the summer. But she was wealthy, I was poor. And so when she cut me to the curb, I was not smart enough to figure out that she was cutting me to the curb.
Oh.
You understand?
All right, what were some of your favorite bands and the first records that you owned?
Oh, the Beatles, of course. The Beatles, they got to be the best. Classic rock, The Who, The Doors, The Rolling Stones.
Do you think those, how like the music people listened back then, like kind of like was like rebellious?
I get it.
Do you think those music were rebellious?
I think it was done on purpose. I think actually, if we're just talking about like intellectual stuff, I think it was is sublimated on purpose, because if you think about what happened even now, basically, you have like a national debt that's expanding like exponentially, and so you have like people that use that money to basically have like groups that basically try to find a way to sublimate rebellion. I think it was done on purpose. Because if you look at the music now, it doesn't say anything. I mean, if there may be somebody that you really like, but it's like the thing about that music at that time was it was popular and everybody listened to it, and they listened to it because of its rebelliousness. And I think that we need a little bit more of that, but it may never happen again. I don't know.
Did you listen to the music because of its rebellious, or?
I didn't listen to it consciously for rebellious reasons,
You just
but
like the music?
I'm just a rebel in a way. Nothing I could do about it.
All right, so describe the house or city you grew up in.
So, I didn't really grow up in a house. I grew up in it was like a division. So the division, there was like 20 divisions or 10 divisions, and you were with like a division of your age group. So basically, to make a long story, it was like being in a prison, and so you had to rise to the top to be the toughest dude.
Did you ever rise to the top?
Of course I was at the top.
All right, describe one of your best memories.
Best memories. I don't know, playing the guitar, I guess. Playing the guitar.
And you still do that now, huh?
I think I do it really, really well.
So were you in the military, like military service?
I was not.
Right.
The reason why I wasn't, because I didn't have anywhere to go for like a semester, and so I went to enlist. But there were like 2 African Americans, and this is like in the ghetto in Indianapolis, Indiana, and they were like saying, "Oh, a white boy," and I'm thinking, I need to find somewhere to get something to eat, but I ain't going and enlisting at that moment because they just hit me the wrong way. But I grew up in the military school, so the last thing I wanted to do was be in the military.
Tell me about the first job you ever had.
The first job I ever had, remember, again, we all had jobs. I think I worked in the cafeteria, so that was a pretty good job. I tried to find the easiest job because that military school basically had shoe shops, storerooms. So basically you worked almost every place in that place. But I navigated the system where I could get foods like taken out of the storeroom without the storeroom owner or the person who was in charge knowing about it.
Were you paid for those jobs?
We were paid, yes. Basically, that was in 1975. They actually, and this is revolutionary for the military school. They actually started paying you, so you had like a checking account, savings account. Yeah, it was good because you had money and you could go spend it. So you would go to like a mall, and so you felt like you were free because you had money to spend. And so you wore some horrible clothes. The 70s were some horrible fashions.
So you didn't like the fashion?
Well, the 70s, right?
Yeah.
It's like high shoes, polyester pants, the disco era, And so if you know anything about fabric, it's polyester. This is cotton. In other words, polyester breathes. So if you're at a disco and people are wearing polyester clothes, they smell.
Oh.
Because it's a breathy fabric.
Fabric, yeah. What did things cost when you were young?
Say it again.
What did things cost when you were young?
Oh, they were exponentially cheaper. I think in 1972, gas was 35 cents a gallon. And you do understand that when it happened, I'm just using, since Jim is a historian, basically you had that's when OPEC tried to raise the prices. That's when the president basically went off the gold standard. So it basically changed the United States exponentially. And then gas started becoming higher and higher and higher. And you see really what it is now.
What about the food and everything? Were they cheaper back then?
Everything was exponentially cheaper. So if it was 35 cents for a gallon, everything was much cheaper.
Was it easier to afford back then?
I think it was, because remember, the standard of living was much higher, because really what happened, if you look at the last presidency of Donald Trump, and I know that Jim is a Donald Trump fan, as is my brother, but basically what he did, he took the 12, basically all teachers got they got $12,000 they could deduct. He took that deduction and basically gave it to the most wealthy people in the United States. So that means that all the teachers are basically paying taxes. And so I don't think it's a good thing. But basically it's made middle class poor, and it's hard to afford things because the standard of living, for example, 33 cents as opposed to a loaf of bread that costs 25 cents. So the ratio is top heavy, real top heavy, and it's not a good thing. And since we're just talking off topic, I basically I'm starting to use Facebook, and so I'm using it because I'm trying to create I have 2,000 Facebook friends, which are not really real friends, but basically when I have a video that I'm going to upload, I'm going to send it to all those 2,000. But basically, it's I have made a conscious decision to basically be a egalitarian person, which is basically I don't care about your ethnicity, your age. In other words, I have so many different types of people that are, they belong to Facebook, and I'm using them. And so, you see some pictures of poor or just starving babies, which is it's sad.
Mm-hmm. Where have you traveled?
All up and down the United States, north and south, east and west, but no European trips.
Any place was your favorite?
I guess New Orleans, Louisiana. Good food, just a great place to be.
Great. Do you know of any famous or well-known people from our family, your family?
No, here's the thing about my great. That's
Mhm.
Asher. That's in the 1700s. What he basically did, he basically was a slave owner in Virginia, and he freed his slaves, and he moved from Virginia to Kentucky, where he could have two wives. He had two wives, 24 children, and basically, and this is a true story. And so the story is the story of the legend of Coleridge. And so my aunt was like a historian, and so basically she had the book, and so it's actually it's published, and basically it was like published in Knoxville, Tennessee, and basically those African Americans followed him to Kentucky, and so they had in that time period up until the 60s, you had like African Americans and African Appalachians who coexisted equally in the hills of Kentucky. So I guess I'm proud of that.
Um, what world event has affected you the most and how?
Death of John F. Kennedy, all the deaths. John F., RF, I think they were all I think it was like a military coup against those people. And so, 9/11, of course, but all those historical events that have really diminished the stature of the American citizen, made us less free.
What invention from your lifetime do you think is the most important and why?
Oh, obviously like the laptop, like Jobs and Gates. I mean, basically, you think about what you have right there. That's because of Jobs and Gates.
Yeah.
So in other words, you have you have an independence that was created from Jobs and Gates. So Gates basically made so much money that he felt guilty, and so he basically had he was his public opinion was bad. So he basically gave Jobs money to create the not the internet, but the like the iPod. So it changed society.
So what do you call it? The world. How has the world changed, both good and bad, since you were a child?
I think that poorer people are getting poorer and richer people are getting richer. And I think that because of the global influence of the internet, I think poorer people are now aware of it. And, I don't think it's a good thing. And so if you look at 1964, the free speech movement is like when the machine becomes so odious, you have to put your hands and gears on the machine and shut it down. So let's just hope that happens. And, I know that sounds like being a socialist, but it would be better if the planet renegotiated the contracts of the rich and the poor, where people who had nothing would at least be able to eat.
Okay. What do you remember the day John F. Kennedy was killed?
I'm, like 4 or 5 years old. I remember it was in black and white. I just remember it was just a dark day, because it was on television, but I never remember seeing it. I just remember it was a dark, dark, dark day. I mean, dark metaphorically, right?
Yeah.
Because it really did change the country exponentially. Because you had a very wealthy person, and so if this wealthy person could be shot in Dealey Plaza, right? It basically said nobody's safe. And I hate to off topic, but that's my expertise is conspiracy, JFK, but there was more than one shooter. I would have to say.
What do you call it? How did the death of John F. K. impacted people around you?
Honestly, I think it shocked them. Like, for example, the CIA has a thing called a PSYOP, and what it is that it's a psychological operation that's done so universally that people don't realize that they're being shocked. And so when you basically were allowing a president to go here and see his brains be blown apart, I think it basically told everybody we're just a little less free. And then when you look at after death after death after death, I think basically what it basically told us is that, if you make the wrong decision, you may not be here anymore.
What is the best advice you have ever received?
Say that again?
What was the best piece of advice you have ever received?
I think it would be from my aunt. My aunt told me to get a trade, like a job that you could do to make money, and then do your passion.
Oh. Do you remember about Pearl Harbor? You weren't born.
No, I don't. But I do remember that if you look at the historical artifacts, I think that was another one where they wanted to get in the war. And again, when I'm saying these things, you understand, we know that Mr. Lynch is a great human.
Yeah.
And he's like a great historian. But his opinion is probably here, and mine's probably here.
Mm-hmm.
So you understand, we would agree to disagree. But from what I have read, and these are alternative, points of view, they wanted to get into they wanted the United States to get in the war.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at like Pearl Harbor, basically they bombed all the ships. They took the better ships and brought them away from the dock. So that's just, my own personal opinion.
Well, don't worry, this is your interview, not Mr. Lynch. So.
All right, very good. But he's a person, honestly, and I'm telling you the truth. He's like a guy I really respect because there's just not too many like him. And I say that really truthfully.
Describe your memory of the day America landed on the moon.
I remember I was in, it was the military school. We were running. We just remember, hearing about it. I just want to be clear here. That's something that I'm very dubious about, too. Well, if you think, there's a thing called the Van Allen belt, which is after a certain point in any planet, there's a radiation field. Mm-hmm. So I'm dubious about landing on the moon. And that's just my own opinion.
Do you believe other events that happen are
falsified?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, you do.
I think everything is a lie. I'm just telling you, I just think that. I think everything is redacted, rechanged, and then they whoever controls the history controls the narrative.
All right. What do you think when you first heard about the Watergate scandal? Everybody kind of hated him. Yeah.
So I guess you thought it was like justice. But again, if you look at that from a revisionist standpoint, basically, he did a lot of good things. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about President Nixon. Mm-hmm. But I think they knew that he knew about Dealey Plaza, which is that everybody who was in the know knew about Dealey Plaza. And so Dealey Plaza was what happened for John F. Kennedy. So he had too much information. So he had his burglars going into the Watergate Hotel to get rid of the evidence that he wanted to get rid of. And so, again, we're taking a revisionist history point of view. And so I think Nixon was not judged fairly. That's just my own opinion.
So what do you call it? So the nation hated Nixon?
They hated him, but here's what they hated. They didn't just hate Nixon. They hated the fact that you had a popular president who was basically gunned down in cold blood, and then you had a war that nobody wanted, but less than 1% of the population makes profit from that war. So they basically used Vietnam for a reason for them to go into Vietnam and make a lot of money. So if you're looking at NCS 263, which is a de-escalation of the Vietnam War, and then as soon as John F. Kennedy was killed, then you had NCS 273, which is basically an escalation of the war. Because here's the thing about war. War makes a lot of money for less than 1% of the population. So without the Vietnam War, they wouldn't have been able to take all those helicopters, planes, and go blow them up.
What do you call it? A lot of people started not they didn't like the government
because they felt that the government, they were very innocent until John F. Kennedy's death, and when they were trying to take American citizens and make them go to Vietnam, nobody wanted to do that. And so back in that time, you basically got a you got a number, and you had to go register for the draft. It was not a good thing, and so no, it wasn't, because I had a brother who basically had to go either to Vietnam or go to prison. So he went to Vietnam and went AWOL. So I don't think it was a good time in history, but it was like a culmination of a lot of things, and so all those culminations, which was like rebellion, the powers that be made sure that rebellion was snuffed out.
What do you call? What's your opinion on the Vietnam War?
I think it was a war that shouldn't have happened, and so it was happened because, again, John F. Kennedy was one of the few presidents who was very knowledgeable, fought in a war, and basically he signed in NCS 263, which was a de-escalation. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to bring it down, and so I think internally everybody knew it was a bad decision.
Did your opinion on the war change or no?
I'm not a lover of war.
Oh,
I think that war should be obsolete.
Do you remember the day the Challenger exploded?
I do remember that. I was working at Hollywood, California. I was working in whatever it was, NBC messenger service. So when I saw it, it didn't affect me like the other ones, because I guess it was tragic. But if you look at it, really make a long story short, the O-rings weren't fitted properly, so somebody didn't do their job properly. But it didn't affect me like the presidents are, like, you know, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, all those people. If those people had stayed alive, the society would have totally changed.
What do you call it? The Cold War? How were people at the time afraid of nuclear war?
Oh my God, like the 70s. I can remember, even when I was 13, I would think there was planes, because we were actually worried that the Russians, we had so much disinformation that you thought that, you really basically thought of the Russians as your enemies.
How did you deal with fear?
What I personally did is, I told you I grew up in the military school, so we had a division. I saw there was a place where I could go in underneath the division, so I had myself a safe hideaway.
Was anybody in your divisions or anything you know how people would accuse them of communism? Anybody in your division ever been accused?
No, not so much. But in the 50s, remember, we're taking 50s, yes, 50s seriously. Because I had a aunt who went to Hollywood, and she was she became a Hollywood screenwriter and married a very famous Jewish producer who she ended up leaving. So she was very conservative. And so there was a big war in the 50s between those that talked, those that didn't talk. But the thing is, though, communism and capitalism were at war with each other. But what people didn't realize is that if you look at the Hegelian dialectic, fascism, communism, capitalism, they almost clash against each other, and the clash creates a change, and the change is more control.
What do you call it? Do you remember the day you heard about 9/11?
Of course I do. I was at Stevenson Middle School in East Los Angeles. When I saw it, again, that's another, we're talking about John F. Kennedy as a psyop. 9/11 was a psyop. It was a psychological, operation made to make Americans deathly afraid and basically change the rules of the Constitution. But after I saw it, I just started doing my 9/11 research. Mm-hmm. And so if you really want to see an alternative point of view, you're going to watch a movie called Loose Change. Mm-hmm. And Loose Change will give you an oppositional point of view about 9/11.
Did 9/11 affect you in any way?
Yeah, it affected me because they changed the Constitution. I'll tell you how it changed. Before 9/11, you could get on an airplane, lickety split, in and out. Then basically they basically made a terrorist watch list, and basically everybody could be considered to be a terrorist. In other words, it's the perfect. It's like taking communism, where you had communists against capitalists, and now it's like everybody could be a terrorist. And so once they think, oh, you could be a terrorist, I saw them take an old woman in a wheelchair and check her private stuff. It's like, come on, does little granny look like a terrorist? It was done purposefully. And so the laws have changed exponentially, and not for the will of the people, and definitely not for the American public.
Do you think, what do you call it, like now these days people are not are not going to accept political parties?
I think they're almost invalid at this point. I mean, if you look at other, forms of government, whether it's Israel, whether it's England or whatever, it's like the two sides. I think they should have a better system, but they're not going to have it.
Do you believe like the presidency is becoming a joke at this point, or no?
It is a joke. It is becoming more of a joke. And remember, Mr. Lynch would say otherwise because he likes Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, no, it's becoming. I mean, look at the rule of law that he violates. I mean, he's like the worst violator of the rule of law. And so, if you're thinking about the separation of powers, he violates it. He just says, "I'm just not going to respond." But honestly, and this is honestly, whoever controls the monetary system controls the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Rothschild banking dynasty, which is basically Chase Manhattan, controls every central bank in the world but 7 countries. And those are the 7 countries that are in the terrorist watch list. In other words, the United States the Federal Reserve System is not federal.
Mm-hmm.
It is basically paying money it's like in England. So it's weird that the Federal Reserve System is not even federal. So whoever controls the money controls the planet. And all the presidents that have gotten shot have primarily gotten shot for monetary reasons. So if you're thinking about Lincoln, you're thinking about Kennedy, you're thinking about anybody who tries to control the monetary system, they do something about it. And that's my own personal opinion, but it's based by, historical facts that I have gathered over the years.
What do you call it? Do you think racism has improved, or not improved, got
Well, people are more aware of racism,
Mm-hmm.
but racism is still a stain on our country.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I grew up in Indiana, which is a very racist state. And so, you just, all you ever heard was the N-word. And so when I grew up with African Americans in the same place for 7 years, you kind of you consider them almost like your brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the awareness has gotten greater, but what people use is racism for a political reason.
Mm-hmm.
And they use it to try to divide different ethnicities.
Do you believe women's right has improved over the years?
Oh, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just the fact, if you look at the representation from 1975 to now,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's exponentially better, but it should be more improved. I mean, if you think about a Joe Biden, you know who Joe Biden is?
Yes.
Well, he's a touchy-feely dude. It's like, if you're going to be a political candidate in this day and age, this is my space bubble, this is your space bubble,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you have a candidate who's touchy-feely, I don't think that's a good thing, right? So I think women have become more aware of their rights. And what they're really saying is, if a woman says no, you should respect a woman's right to have their opinions. But I think it's gotten better, but it needs to get better and better and better, because I hate to say this, but if you think about a male-controlled society, well, it's like, why do we have all these wars? Because we have dudes controlling the weaponry. I think if there was more women involved in the political process, they would be less likely to go do like dudes do, which go, I mean, look how dude does it. Let's fight, let's drop a bomb, let's kill you. I think it'll be exponentially better when more women are in charge of things they need to be in charge of. And that's just my personal opinion. But you know, my wife, even when I met her, like she was always a feminist, and you know, I have no problem with femininity.
Do you think feminism like changed over time, like the meaning of
Of
it?
course it did. It became like a hustle too. Here's the hustle. Like, for example, like my wife's mother, you know, was like considered herself a feminist. And here's what it did. Here's what slick people do. They take the concept of feminism and they use it against you, because basically what they wanted to do, they wanted to have like two people working, not one. So they one thing about like smart people, they take the concept, because here's what you have to do. You have to take the concept of feminism and let me see the definition, then I'll tell you whether I'm a feminist. And so, but I'm saying smart people take like movements and they subvert them and use them for their own purposes. And here was the subversion. You used to have one guy who went to work, and this is just my wife's mother. She stayed at home, so she was happy. She just chilled. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
And then it changed where, like, you couldn't afford your bills unless you had two people working. So she was kind of bitter about that. My wife's mother, who's now deceased, but you know, a great woman, right?
All right. Well,
I'm
that's
done?
it. Yes.
You know
Thank
what's funny? The first 11 were the most painful.